right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for participating in today's CFO Leadership Council program, Creative Compensation, a discussion on benefits and compensation. My name is Mary Christensen. I am the Marketing Director for our local Minneapolis St. Paul chapter, and with us today is Cherise Wiesau, and she is also our Marketing Director, helping us to put on this program today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to go over, specifically instructions for those who do need to receive CPE credits. You must be logged in via the link. We cannot give out credits to folks who dial in through their phones. So if you do need credit, please hang up and use the link to join us online. And you will have to answer 5 out of the 6 polling questions that will appear up on your screen throughout the program. We will be muting lines to avoid distraction, and if we could ask folks to turn off their video while the program is happening, that would be great, and it will allow a better view of the speakers. We would like to encourage everybody to participate in this, and please ask your questions as they come up. It's going to be a great conversation today, and I'm sure that there are many on the line who are dealing with a lot of the things that are going to be discussed. If you'd like to chime in, great. You can, if you are courageous and would like to unmute and ask your question, you are welcome to. Otherwise, you can put them in the chat. If you prefer your question to be asked anonymously, please private message me your question and I will ask on your behalf. All attendees are eligible to receive 1.5 CPE credits for today's program. And let's see here. I think we're moving on to the next slide. If you are wondering about membership, how to become a member, or the benefits of membership, feel free to connect with either Cherise or myself after the call. You can also go to our website. It's a great place to find information. You can learn about membership options, benefits, and cost. There will be a very brief survey following our program today. I would encourage everybody to take 2 minutes and fill it out. We do use that feedback to build our future programs. So if you've got some ideas or some things that are keeping you up at night, let us know what they are and we'd be happy to tackle those for you. Next, I'd like to just mention a quick reminder to our existing members about CFO Connect. It is an online email listserv forum, and it's meant to be a confidential space to be able to reach out to your peers. It is open to all of our CFO members nationwide, and so if you're not in it or you're wondering what it is or you missed the email on it, just reach out, let us know, and we will make sure to get you included in there. And next slide is, of course, us. I'd like to give a good shout out to our steering committee members and our fantastic sponsor partners. Thanks to these amazing folks, our programs are possible. With Bank of America, we have Abby Godlewski. Riveron, there's Mike Traeger. Oracle NetSuite is Heidi Munson and Trina Scott. From RSM, we have Mark Roepke. And from Cressa, we have Brent Wilde. Thank you to our sponsors and for all of your work that you put in on these programs. It is very appreciated. As we all navigate these uncertain times together, please keep these folks in mind. They are definitely industry leaders and they are here to help. All right. I'd also like to acknowledge our planning team. No program comes together without awesome teamwork, and I'd like to give a huge shout out to Lynn Blake, Eric Bossler, and Cindy Sattler for their work on this program and recruiting fantastic speakers that we are really excited to share with you today. As we get started, I would like to know that, or would like you to know, the audience, that our speakers would like this to be interactive. So again, if you are courageous and would like to unmute and ask your question, you are invited to. Otherwise, you can throw your question in the chat or private message me. Not a problem. For now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's program, Lynn Blake. Lynn is a founding member of the Minneapolis chapter, and she's also been serving on the steering committee since its inception 4 years ago. She has been a big contributor to the success of this chapter. Lynn's background includes over 25 years of leadership experience in finance, accounting, and operation roles for companies spanning a variety of industries, with a majority of her experience in global manufacturing. She has worked with companies ranging in size from startup to Fortune 500. We are honored to have her on our team. Lynn, please take it away.
Thank you, Mary. And thanks everyone who is on and joining us in my breakout room. I met a lot of people from chapters other than the Twin Cities chapters, so that is an added benefit or maybe a silver lining of our webinar-oriented environment now, that people can get more breadth and we can have participation from the country, not just the Twin Cities. For those of you in the Twin Cities, thank you for joining on this picture-perfect autumn day. I really appreciate you being part of this session. We've got a great panel lined up. We have a large panel today and representing a variety of different disciplines as well as industries and viewpoints on this topic. So I think it'll be really interesting to discuss the current dynamics around the issues of human resources, compensation, and benefits from a variety of perspectives. Our panel consists of people representing senior human resources positions at a variety of types and sizes and ownership structures of companies, as well as legal and industry experts on the topic. So with that, I would like to give our speakers a little airtime to go off mute and introduce each of themselves so you have a bit better idea for their backgrounds, and certainly consider their backgrounds related to questions you might have on these topics, because they obviously have a variety of different experiences. First, maybe I'll ask Don from Marsh to pop in and introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So my name is Don Scroggins. I'm Senior Vice President of Strategy and Employee Benefits at Marsh Plan Agency. So MMA is referred to as part of the Marsh family of companies, which is the largest global broker in the world. And so I've been doing employee benefits consulting for about nearly 25 years, helping small to middle market companies kind of strategize around their consulting around their benefits offerings and what they offer their employees. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel.
Thank you, Don. How about Barbara Anderson, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself?
Sure, thanks, Lynn. I'm Barbara Anderson. I am the Director of Total Rewards for Condeva Drug Delivery, a brand new company that was started on the 1st of May, and I just about a month ago. I have experience in human resources, specifically comp and ben, for the last about 25 years, and so worked in a variety of industries, and the pharmaceutical industry is a new one for me. So I'm happy to be here today, and thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, Barbara. Lynette, I believe you're on as well, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Lynette Heath, and I'm the Chief HR Officer at Invent. We are a public company. We spun off from Pentair 2.5 years ago. May 1st was our date as well, that we got to ring the bell on Wall Street. Exciting times. And we are global, about 10,000 employees, a little over $2 billion in revenue. Prior to that, I was with a privately held company called Entrust, security software company, and then many years with GE in a variety of industries. So I love being able to jump from industry to industry in HR and continue to learn. And of course, that's what this year has been, a learning opportunity, as we're facing things that we just never have before. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Lynette. Next, Ali, would you please join and give us your background?
Hi, everyone. Ali Bebahani. Great to join you. I work at a venture capital firm called New Enterprise Associates. We're one of the largest, also one of the oldest. We're currently investing NEA 17, which is a $3.6 billion fund in both tech and healthcare. I only focus on the healthcare side. We invest sort of across all stages, from kind of pure startups to later stage into some public companies as well. I've been here for 13 years, and most of our companies are much smaller. They're usually sort of startups, but I'm involved in 17 companies now and on the board of both public and private, and serve on a number of comp committees as well.
Thank you very much, Ali. And then Tom Walker.
Hi, everyone. I am Tom Walker. I'm a partner at the Twin Cities law firm of Winthrop and Weinstein, and have been practicing in the employee benefits area for about 30 years. During that time, my areas of emphasis are really incentive and deferred compensation, assisting companies with designing, changing, sometimes terminating those practices, and employee stock ownership plans. And then, I also do just the gambit of, other health and welfare and employee benefits work that comes my way. So that's my area, and I'm excited to be here today with everyone.
Great, thanks so much, Tom. And again, thanks all the panelists for joining us this afternoon. I was thinking, or we thought we'd start out maybe kind of at a high level or macro level and talk a bit about marketplace trends. So both, maybe the past kind of 12 to 24 months, we'd be interested in hearing what some general trends have been, and then as we turn toward 2021, how those are changing. And maybe Don, if you could kick off that discussion and help us understand what you're telling your clients, what you're seeing out there, and kind of some marketplace context would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll go back and I'll call it 2019 BC, before COVID, since it seems like it was so long ago that we actually had some normalcy in this environment. But as we all remember, it was low unemployment rates were going on. It was a war on talent. Companies were looking for different ways to recruit and retain their employees. So people were coming up with different structure around their benefits and compensation, financial incentives. And, we had so many different generations that were actually in the workplace, right? So we had to deal with the 35-year-old with experience, or 35 plus years of experience, the executive, down to that recent college grad that was untapped talent and potential that we wanted to acquire. So there's a lot of dynamics going on before COVID hit. So even before COVID hit, I think employees were valuing different benefits differently, right? So we saw requests for companies that they said what they value now is their time. And so we were seeing a trend of saying people wanted to have time and flexibility and time off. So we had a lot of requests of people looking for how do you do leave management, parental leave, and expand that out. So people were saying they valued that time. That was a new benefit that we saw kind of increasing pre-COVID, kind of going into this. And now in this new work environment, I think the trends are changing quite rapidly, obviously. So flexibility we're seeing with a lot of employees that can work from home, that don't have production jobs or manufacturing jobs. They have to juggle multiple things now with their day job, with being, maybe a parent, a part-time teacher, a referee, or their siblings that are fighting. So there's a lot of pressure that's putting on this. They need flexibility in the work environment. So I think that's the big key that we're seeing right now, is flexibility and how you're offering that for your employees. But just a couple of things I'll talk about on the benefits side that we're seeing is telemedicine obviously has been a big explosion over the last 6 months with COVID, when those care providers that had non-emergent care shut down, people had to seek care elsewhere. So telemedicine, that has always been around, kind of increasing over the last couple years, has really accelerated over the last 6 months, because that's the care that people need to go to for non-emergent care. So we see that being a trend that's going to continue into the future. We also see a lot of emphasis, and it's no surprise to people, that mental health and behavioral health has been a big focus energy for companies. So with the stresses that we're all feeling this day and age of working remotely and having to do things differently, companies are looking at, well, how can we support our employees in this new environment? So they tap it on their employee assistance program. They're offering different virtual trainings to support their employees around this. We're doing stuff around mental health first aid training to identify with leaders and managers how to help their employees when they're struggling with things throughout that. So, it happens to be this Saturday is National or World Mental Health Day. And so just a small example of this, our company kind of broadly across the country said, in recognition of this, we're going to have a half day off, paid time off on Friday of this week to kind of celebrate and say, people disconnect, recharge your battery, and just don't deal with business. So we have to think differently what the benefits are that we're offering and how we're helping to deal with employees in this environment. And then one final thing I'll just say is, obviously with people working from home more remotely, we're all on Zoom, we're all on maybe our own computers or computer offered. Identity theft is being such a big thing that's happening right now, and ransomware attacks are increasing significantly that we're seeing with our employer groups. So how do you protect your employees from that? Because you don't want another stress of having their ID being stolen and having to track this down and have checking accounts or whatever being stolen. So we're seeing these different benefits being offered on ID protection. So those are just some of the things that have changed kind of rapidly in this new environment that we're seeing out there, and the trends we're seeing to how do you protect those employees in the new environment, but also how do you support them with the new stresses that they have. So those are just some of the thoughts that I would say I'm seeing as current trends in the last 6-7 months.
That all makes a lot of sense. Really a lot of new dynamics are, you know, recently coming to the forefront. Let me ask you, Don, just because this is largely a CFO audience, so we tend to think in dollar signs, but from a benefits, you know, cost perspective, I know, you know, some years have been, every year is a little different, but there's kind of a normal rhythm of, you know, August, get together with your benefits broker, and usually my human resources department leads all that. And at some point I get involved, and, you know, I'm kind of looking at options from, you know, the financial impact to the company as well as to employees, of course. And it's always kind of like, oh, everything's up X% this year. How much of that X% do we pass on to our employees? How much do we fund? And that's, you know, always kind of the typical rhythm for that discussion. Is that still the norm, or what are you seeing from a cost and kind of for the CFO's involvement in kind of financial planning around those things?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what we're seeing with a lot of our groups that we're meeting with now is it depends on the situation the business had to go through before. So they're getting their health insurance renewals at the same time they always did previously, but I think they're looking at through a different lens now. So if companies had to go through freezing merit increases across the board, or furloughs, or freezing the 401k match, or potentially salary reduction, if there's already a lot of stress they're putting financially on their employees, a lot of the CFOs are looking through a different lens than they did maybe in previous years when it was kind of business as usual. So I think what we're seeing is probably a little bit more empathy from the CFOs that we've seen in the past. And certainly the HR has always had their empathy out there, but we're seeing that we can't put another burden on their employees to say, if we're getting a 5 or 7% increase, how much do we pass along to our employees? If they've struggled with a lot of things they've done to push the financial burden on their employees during the year to kind of survive as a business, this is kind of like the last thing they're saying, hey, you know, we don't want to put another stress on our employees. So what I'm seeing just anecdotally with the clients we're talking to is they're trying any way they can to kind of keep that and mitigate that cost increase as much as they can to not put more burden on their employees. So that's kind of the trend I'm seeing that's maybe a little different than previous years.
Interesting. Okay. And when we planned for this session, we had said we don't want the whole session to be, you know, talking about COVID-19 impacts. And, you know, we got into the first question. Of course, we can't help but be talking about it because it's touching so many things. But on that note, we did want to ask all our panelists what effect in terms of compensation and benefits, and generally even HR strategies, you know, how are you looking at how COVID's impacted your business, and how is that affecting the planning you're doing around incentives and compensation? And maybe I'll ask Lynette, if you wouldn't mind giving us your perspective first.
Sure. Thanks, Lynn. Honestly, it has a big impact on it, right? It's impacted our business. And of course, with the incentive plan structure, we have to have a certain level of performance to be able to pay out our incentive plan, and we're below in a variety of areas. And I'm hearing that from other CHRO peers across companies. So we're focused on not only what are we going to do with this year's plans, but also it's impacted how are we then thinking through designs for next year, because next year is also bringing some unknowns. I'm meeting frequently with our CFO, with broader teams, with the business leaders, our presidents and our different business segments. And we recently had a board meeting with our compensation committee. And the discussion is, we have not yet determined what we're going to do with this year's incentive plans. We know there's a small portion that'll pay out, but many of the other metrics are underwater. We made a conscious decision not to put in a new plan, not to put in a short-term plan, but to say we will use discretion to some degree at the end of the year. And while we're getting closer to what that might look like, we haven't made a final decision. Then we're thinking about our sales incentive plans, as whether also our long-term incentive plans and our annual incentive plan for next year. And our conversations are, do we need to rethink, because there's still uncertainty for us going into next year in our industry, do we maybe need to widen the payout ranges and also maybe reduce what some of those would be at certain points to be able to fund a wider payout range? And understanding what it looks like, because target setting, we believe, will continue to be a challenge for us. So we don't normally go from year to year and really change the payout ranges significantly, but that is something we're considering this year, that we would consider more of a COVID plan design structure, and we would go back to more of our normal design, hopefully in 2022. But we're being open, and we're investigating plan design in a different way because of COVID and the impact.
I'm sure all those conversations and planning is taking a lot more time than even,
Oh, yes.
which is not insignificant even to begin with, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It seems like daily discussions and conversations, and let's talk about funding and just to the earlier points Don made, knowing steps we had to take this year, which did include some furloughs, which did include some salary reductions that we're just coming off of as we speak. Being really thoughtful of the messaging we also send to our employees. We as an organization had merit increases this year because those were effective March 1st before there was too much impact. We're being thoughtful about next year, but it's all a balance. And the employees are watching very, very closely on what we do and the message it sends.
I'm sure. I maybe keep on the same question for our other panelists on, what's new and different and driven by COVID for your business. I was going to turn to Barbara. Now, what's new and different is probably everything, since I know Condeva is a new company spun out of 3M this year, which probably adds even more challenges. But Barbara, maybe you could share with us how your company's addressing design and any specific, considerations or impacts from COVID specifically.
Yeah, you're right that as a new company, there's all kinds of challenges and all kinds of setup. And as you mentioned, we spun off from 3M. So there's a big established set of rules and also just plans that people were accustomed to. That's all shifted, as of May 1st, everything changed. Right now, the plan is to move forward with the incentives that we had set up. I think kind of like Lynette said, things will sort of continue to change through 2021. And we're probably gonna look at not being at a total state of normalcy until maybe the year after. I think that COVID has made everybody, whether you're a brand new company or an established organization, just sort of step back and say, okay, what is this going to mean and how long is it going to impact us? I think like with everything in our personal lives and in our work, nobody thought that this was going to impact us for as long as it has. And here we are in our breakout group. People were talking about when are you going back to the office, if you're going back to the office. And certainly the 1st of March, none of us would have thought people would be talking about not going back for a year. I remember in March it was like thinking, well, probably by the 15th of April or at least the 1st of May, everybody will be back. How long could this last? And I think that trickles to everything we do, our comp programs, our incentives, the way things are set up, and for us even how our teams are being put together, because so many of us, myself included, have met very few people in person. I'm in a new hire team and a new hire situation, totally online, looking at people on camera and on screen. So it's interesting and something I never planned for or thought I would have to experience.
I couldn't agree more in all those ways. I tend to be an optimist, and this was not really a good year for the optimist to be correct. I remember telling my senior in high school in March that I thought there was a very good chance she would graduate in person, and her graduation was May 31st, and of course that didn't happen, and here we are 6 months later almost. So maybe I'll ask Ali, who sits on a number of boards of companies, different sizes as well. Your firm's invested in a lot of early stage companies. So the challenges are different for across kind of the life cycle and dimension of size, continuum of sizes of companies. But what are you seeing that's unique, both in terms of challenges and or approaches or strategies that either your portfolio companies or companies you are on the board of are seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think it really the impact of what COVID has done to companies really depends on where the stage of the company is, right? So a lot of the companies that I work with don't generate any revenues, right? They're preclinical or they're in the clinic, they're burning money, right? And so ironically, it's the companies that were commercial that got impacted the most. Not surprisingly, because if you were doing surgical procedures and the hospitals were shut down, the month of April you went from having revenues to almost having no revenues, right? Versus the companies that were in clinical trials or that were preclinical, they're used to just burning money, right? And so from that perspective, they weren't impacted because they didn't have like loss of revenue or anything like that. But I think the impact generally in biotech and in most device companies has been sort of more muted unless you were, on the commercial side of things. Having said that, like everyone's sort of impacted, right? And so in all of our companies at the beginning of the year set out certain goals and objectives based on, what they'll be measured on throughout the year. And that's what we use to do kind of the end of the year when it comes to variable comp and performance and then merit increases. And so I think there, like the are valid anymore. And so and I think you've seen a wide variety of different companies taking different approaches, some recasting the goals, some sticking to the goals and just playing it by ear. And I think it'll be interesting to see year sort of what different companies decide to do in terms of the variable comp and then merit increases for this year.
I'm curious for any of our panelists, are you seeing or recommending any drastic changes to compensation plans, like looking at bonus or variable compensation structures being measured on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, or reevaluated, replanning maybe mid-year, because I think most businesses are going to have COVID drag coming into the beginning of the year, and it's not known for how long, but so it's hard to set that goal or that measurement for the full year when the year we know is going to start unnaturally and don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah, I will say some of my companies have just decided, to say, all right, I mean, especially the ones where there's no way they can hit the objectives, right? So if you wanted to enroll a clinical trial, but because the, clinical trials were the first thing to go when a hospital shifted towards, towards treating COVID patients, I think those companies, some of them have decided, let's recast sort of the goals, right, mid-year and then measure off of that. There are others who sort of more purist sort of view said, well, those were the goals that we set out at the beginning of the year. And if we didn't achieve them, then, then that's something that we need to take into account. So I've seen a wide variety. It'll be interesting to see kind of what happens, as we come toward the end of the year in terms of what people do.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'll ask Tom, anything, I'm sure there's a lot of potential burgeoning issues from a legal standpoint, but relative to comp planning, going into the new year, any legal, things to be aware of right now or more aware of than usual in this, more difficult than usual year?
Well, one thing I've been seeing a lot of are companies that are really struggling to figure out, kind of from the bottom up, what's our office structure look like in the next, 24 months. And if we're working virtual, we may be, very heavy on the number of employees we have, especially, maybe a business with, with a lot of employees and long-term employees at that. And so over the years, I had seen maybe 2 early retirement programs, but I've encountered a number of companies, more than that this year alone, that, they sort of had they maybe avoided furloughs, with PPP money or whatever, but now they're going, okay, this isn't going to end. Barbara said April 15th. And by the way, I was thinking it was going to be a couple of weeks myself. So I was with you. But, what this may go on for 2 years. What are we going to do? And so I've actually seen a number of companies looking at early retirement programs because they have to, they're looking to maybe cut staff and they'd rather, give some, good incentives for, some of their longer term employees to go out, because that makes the decisions less difficult, afterwards if it's a win-win. So I've seen a lot of that. Beyond that, really the biggest legal, as people look at the incentive programs that are in place right now, they're really the only parameters I've kind of really seen people looking at is if they're trying to, there's limits on their ability to sort of kick out payment of, incentive compensation, at least annual incentive compensation. So there's some rules you have to kind of go through to try to modify that. it's not as difficult as Ali sort of said. If they just say, well, so, too bad you didn't hit the targets, and we'll look at that next year when we readdress that. But for ones who are trying to modify the levels, that's fine. But when they're trying to modify the timing for payments and stuff, that raises some legal issues.
That makes a lot of sense. I have talked to some friends, colleagues who are comp committee chairs or members, and feel from a legal standpoint, kind of their advice is it's safest to stay in the grooves you've cut with your plans, rather than, say it's an unprecedented year, so we're going to throw it out and change everything. I mean, that's not only a lot of effort and resources, but change is hard for employees, even if it's intended to be positive, and then it presents legal issues as well. So that seems, that's kind of a theme I'm hearing too. So, and it's interesting your point too on the a lot of companies doing early retirement offers or other buyout packages, and that's a smart strategy. But the downside of that can be cutting too deep, right? Or losing too many people, business rebounds, and you maybe find yourself needing even more new hires than you expected, that type of thing. That brings us to kind of a next question we had for the panel on most companies, if not hiring currently, will be needing to hire over the next year. Any changes or different approaches in compensation packages you're offering for new hires these days? And maybe I'll ask, go back to Lynette on that, because you've got a lot of employees you're dealing with at nVent.
Yes, and what we heard early on in this discussion is the war on talent was pre-COVID. I will tell you, it's still there. And it's still a very competitive market. And we believe in our compensation philosophy. So we're not really veering away from our compensation packages that we would offer. We're making sure they're at market. But I will say, and I think this echoes some of the things that we heard in terms of feedback of what employees are looking for. Now, I would say the desire for flexibility has increased at this time of COVID. So we're really trying to work with our leaders to think more broadly about flexibility. We're doing some training. We're coming out with a program because we really were pretty much in the office all the time. And I have leaders around the world who are just, okay, Lynette, so when can I get everyone back in the office where I can see them? And we're having discussions around how do you manage results-based, outcomes-based, because just because you could see them sitting across the office, you still really didn't have any more idea of what they were doing than you do now when they're sitting at home. And that's a bit of a culture shift that we're going through. But also, I think to Don's point around benefits, we were planning and having discussions around enhancing some of our benefits. And we have now announced that we will be launching parental leave. We actually launched that, I should say, this year we launched parental leave, which was new and enhanced, and our employees are appreciating that. We're also going to be launching a voluntary time off program for volunteering. And so giving employees just a day a year or 8 hours if you're hourly. I will say at this time during COVID, when there isn't a lot of opportunity to go out there and volunteer, it's a little mixed message, but we're letting employees know, hey, it matters. And we know being involved in their community matters. And then we're also we're adding and switching to some floating time off, floating holidays, if you will, just to give our employees instead of the set holidays. So again, trying to drive flexibility, and you take the days that matter to you versus having that set bank of fixed holidays throughout the year. So we're looking more at the non-financial aspects of the packages we can offer and hopefully remain desirable to our potential new hires and candidates.
Interesting. Thank you. Barbara, how about your experience, both where you're at currently, and then you have experience with a lot of different sized companies, including taking companies through growth in different stages. What are some of the strategies you're talking about for for hiring, and I guess both retention and hiring, given your experience?
Well, I think our strategies are a lot like what Lynette described. That I think companies that are really thinking this through are moving away from just the base salary and what else is it that you offer to an employee. I have found that employees don't look for a company maybe that they can stick with throughout a career, but they look more for a company that is a culture that's a fit, that has a culture that's a fit for their lives, whether it's a flexible schedule or, you know, I would have said 6 months ago, a work from home opportunity, but now that's kind of become the thing for everyone. But really more just flexible hours. Does my company offer me little things like free coffee or free parking or, you know, some of those things, the kind of things that when you get them and you have them at your company and somebody says, wow, that's kind of cool, I didn't have that at my last company. It makes a big difference. And for anybody who's trying to set up a program like that, or even look inward to what is it that we're offering that really doesn't cost us all that much and makes us an employer of choice. A lot of times it's those things. You know, I might have, if I'm a new employee, and, you know, right now at Condeva I am, but, you know, even looking at what employees that I've hired in the past few years, it might have been the salary or the position that got them interested to first call and say, I'd really like to talk with you further about working at your company. But the thing that makes them stay is the culture that we create. I know, and it's interesting, Lynette, that you guys put together the day off for community service. I think that is becoming more and more a part of what employees are looking for in a company. Does this company sort of meet my values? Do they care that I want to volunteer for a cause that's important to me? Do they maybe match some of my contributions to those? Some bigger organizations do that. That might be a more costly thing. So the cheaper thing to do for sure would just be to give them a day off and let them go, you know, build a house for Habitat for Humanity, or volunteer at a soup kitchen, or do one of those kind of things. And I think while those kind of things can make you feel great, and are important for our own well-being to give back to our communities, it's even better if the company that you work for endorsed it. And I really think that's what people are looking for, is more, how do I fit with this company? And, you know, the difference between I'm at a place that is just really expecting me to bang out this work to earn my paycheck, or do I want to be at a company that really considers me a part of the family? And I'm, you know, not to get too terribly mushy, but I think people that feel like they're at companies who really care about their well-being, and certainly all of us as employers this year have been able to focus on the well-being of employees, because, you know, for real, we're letting them stay home because it's right for their well-being. And a lot of them have to take care of children and you know, just stay safe, basically. And the more employers can engage with their employees to let them feel like that's important to them too, I think they're gonna attract and retain the best, because people will feel like they belong.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing Mary, a note from Mary that we've got a question, I think, from the audience coming in. Mary?
We do. The question is asking if you can discuss how to approach employees in terms of transparency when it comes to companies' financial position, compensational capabilities, and overall stability on the market.
Well, I can speak for us, but we have a little different lens because we're publicly held. So we have earnings calls every quarter where we're pretty transparent with the street on what our financial performance is. So for us, we certainly follow up, we cascade. I can tell you I was in a private company before coming over here, and we actually followed a very similar cadence, even though we were privately held. We found that for employees to really understand maybe some of the actions that you have to take in years that aren't so great, they've got to be educated on the status of the company. So my philosophy has been sharing as much as you can about the financial stance, and also just educating on what are they seeing around us. I will tell you, we have a lot of conversations around what we're experiencing now versus 2008 and 2009. In 2008, 2009, people could look left and right, their neighbors, their families, And it was pretty consistent with what was happening, right? 401ks were cut, merits were cut, there may have been layoffs, but this experience is very different because we have industries that are doing great. We have industries that have basically halted and everything in between. And so from an employee perspective and the competitive dynamics for employees and their availability to go elsewhere, it's extremely different. And we're cognizant of that. So we're very upfront, but again, we're publicly held. So I think we have a different layer of transparency than non-public companies do.
Sure, that's a fundamental difference. Ali, your portfolio, I assume you're a lot of early stage and private companies, have the public company experience from your board participation, but share your views if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. No, and I think a lot of what Lynette said resonates. I mean, every CEO kind of makes a different sort of calculation or decision when it comes to how much to share. But I think in my experience, the more transparent you are with the organization, the better. And people understand, right? And I think when it was, some of our companies in April had to make the tough decision of either furloughing or reducing salaries or even laying off. And I think, the more that the organization isn't surprised, the more they, people understand, right? People understood when we had to do the furloughs or salary reductions for a period of time because, that was the only way the companies were going to survive, right? Because, most of these companies are small and don't have a lot of cash resources, certainly aren't profitable. So I think, to me, that's always the best is, the more transparent you are, people do understand and at the end of the day, it's better if the company is around than if it isn't, because that and sometimes you have to make tough decisions like that. But people will understand if you're upfront with them.
Thank you, Barbara. Anything to add on the sharing of financial strength, results, measures?
I think I would just echo what's already been said, and the transparency is really important. And in my experience, the higher the individual in the organization that sends that message, the better. And it just develops that level of trust that if the CEO or the CFO or someone at a high level who really knows what's happening is willing to spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes talking with people, even if it's just like a conversation over coffee, kind of an ask me whatever you want, you got 15 minutes. I think employees really appreciate that. And the transparency is again something that makes them feel better, even if the news isn't all good. At least they were willing to share, and it's not this sort of ducking around and trying to get in the right gossip circle so you can hear what's going on. That's not healthy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think silence can be scary, and
Yeah.
The majority of employees don't assume that no news is good news. They assume the opposite.
Sure. Yeah.
Agree with that.
Thank you. So some of the things that are even more important now, both from a probably generational workforce standpoint, as well as a pandemic standpoint, we've touched on a lot of that. I'm just wondering, back to Don, since I haven't brought you in for a bit, from a kind of that next gen trend standpoint, you touched on some of those in the macro comments you made. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just say, well, I felt so bad for those recent grads that were coming out during the heart of this pandemic. Our hearts went out to them, whether they're juniors and having internships that had to be pulled, or they're recent grads that maybe the job didn't stick. So it's a tough environment for this kind of new generation coming out into the workforce. But I think I'll just add is, we talk about from the benefits lens, I guess. Certainly having a job and having an environment, we talked a lot about this. They're looking for the cultural fit. I think Barb talked about that. Who's going to fit their culture? Who's going to give them flexibility? But they also want the mentoring and the training and the career growth. So I think they're looking for that. This new generation is looking for that. So maybe the traditional employees saying, what does my health insurance look like? What's the 401k match? A lot of these kids coming out of school have the student debt that they have to pay off, right? So they're saying, I got to take that on first before I can do anything else to, help with my financial well-being. So I know companies are looking at not just tuition reimbursement, which has been around for a long time, but also kind of loan repayment. So companies are looking at ways to kind of prepay or repay loans on behalf of the employees that they hire. So it's kind of a retention tool that companies are looking at this point. Maybe a lot of the CFOs know it's not a a tax deductible event that they have long term. Hopefully that can change over the period of time, so there's more ability for companies to do this and have the tax deductibility of that. But it's a way to say, hey, if I as the employer can pay $100 per month of your loan that you have outstanding in the first year, and you stay for another year, I'll do another $200 and $300. It's a great motivation for a company to be a part of that, that you're caring about their well-being. And I think we talked a lot about that. So I think we've talked a lot about the flexibility, talked a lot about the support for this next generation, but I think they're looking for different types of benefits, and it's more about the culture and the training development that they get within there and why they're going to stick with a particular employer. So I think that's critically important for business leaders to be thinking about. You know, we have multiple generations within the workforce, so how do we help to attract and retain each one of those different generations? I think is critically important.
Thank you. I don't think that's going to end either.
No.
Getting a little maybe more tactical or financially oriented for a second. This is the time of year that the organization and all the CFOs are typically pulled in or leading the planning, financial planning process, operational planning process, certainly for calendar year companies. So not all companies necessarily, but obviously that process looks a lot different. The numbers for 2020 probably aren't the right baseline. It's definitely even more complicated than usual, those conversations, but those obviously dovetail into the compensation planning. And I know as CFO, I've been highly involved with my management team and comp committee of the board on what the financial targets should be. I think one of the panelists, maybe Lynette, mentioned contemplating widening ranges on variable comp targets to maybe increase the chance of payout given even more uncertainty next year, to at least maybe motivate people that there could be some opportunity for variable compensation, even if it's not a great year or doesn't start out that way. I'm curious from the other the panelists, are you thinking about your financial targets for in general and for your comp planning and bonus plan, if you will, differently? And if so, how? Ali, maybe I'll ask you, with the private companies in the earlier stage, obviously those size companies have a little bit more process flexibility, if nothing else, and maybe less formality. Are you able to be more creative at the earlier stage private companies, perhaps?
Yeah, I think, I think the hard part is right now we're sort of in the moment, right? And you're trying to kind of forecast what's going to happen the rest of the year. You're trying to forecast, okay, where, how, if our business has slowed or we've missed certain targets, or, the clinical trials have slowed, like how will that impact it long term? And for a lot of our companies, they have the cash, but they're burning it, right? So it's a dwindling asset. And so, all of a sudden the milestones you thought you were going to be able to hit, you may not be able to hit. And some of those milestones aren't, this year, they're, a year or two out. And so I think right now, there certainly is flexibility. I think, my sense kind of right now is people are just trying to keep things stable, stabilize the situation and keep things status quo, right? And so I have a feeling that this year, whatever happens, will probably, be, chalked up to being a one-time situation where, you maybe didn't hit the goals, but to stabilize things, you may wind up, like, for example, paying out comp, the variable comp, or having some sort of merit increase. I think the trickier thing is what happens, and I think Lynette sort of alluded to what happens next year, right? And how do you think about goals, and how do you think about performance and those kinds of things for next year? And I think I don't think we, certainly across the companies that I'm involved with, I don't think that really has been factored in quite yet. I think it will be as people sort of start to set goals for next year. And so I think that certainly is something that's going to become more top of mind. But honestly, like I think we're all sort of trying to just see how things play out before kind of making any hard decisions yet. But certainly I think that's to come as we get toward the end of the year.
Barbara, do you have anything to add on kind of the target setting component for planning before we move on to some other topics?
just that for us, I think that the target planning is more about being a new company than it is working toward some goal that we set before. But I think that among my peers in HR and in compensation, what a lot of them are doing this year is, rather than have the conversation with the employee during the merit review process, of just kind of going down a list of, okay, a year ago we talked about this, if this is the cycle that you're in, a year ago we talked about this and we set all these goals, and well, for a variety of reasons, we haven't met any of those. And rather than have that conversation, this year move the conversation to more of a developmental thing, and be at a little higher level, but dig deeper with the employee. What sort of things are you proud of having done this year? You know, this has not been an easy year. So what kinds of things do you think worked well? If you could have a do-over, what would you do differently? And recognizing that we don't really know, because we don't have a crystal ball as to what's going to happen next year. What would you like to see yourself doing when we're sitting here next year? What will you want to be the most proud of? And just kind of have that higher level discussion that's probably a lot less structured than your normal performance review discussion, but hopefully is more productive among employees, with the idea that you still got to have the transparency of, here's what we plan to do with your comp. I think the more upfront you can be with folks about both their merit, if they're expecting one this year, or their incentives and what they felt like they were working toward, and they're maybe feeling like they're not going to make, kind of talk it through and let them know up front, this is where we are. And I think the truth and the transparency is probably going to get you a lot further than just sort of not saying anything, because it's not going to be that they won't notice. They'll notice.
Right. Lynette, do you have any additional perspectives on kind of that merit increase, performance discussion, annual, the employee discussion, dialogue around that?
Not that we would change the process that we have, but when we spun out from Pentair, we made a conscious decision to separate our development conversations, our annual review from the compensation planning and discussion, because the feedback had been, when they were combined as one, really the annual review was about 2 minutes and it really focused on comp. And we had a conscious culture shift to say, we're really focusing on our people, which means their development, which means more feedback. So that, I think, will serve us well, because the first conversation is solely focused on their feedback for the year, their development, talking about their goal achievement and what's next. And then separate from that, a little later, we have the actual compensation discussion. So I think that will serve us very well, because it has been a challenging year. We've seen some fantastic performance from our people during this time. We're an essential employer, so we have people in plants around the world, and what our supply chain and our operations team had to do to make sure we were up and running, and the different things we were faced with was just amazing and incredible. And so it's important that our employees get that focused time and feedback and discussion, and then we'll go into the comp planning conversation about a month and a half later.
That's great. Thank you. We're kind of running close to our hour, but I really want for a last formal question, and then we'll have time for Q&A from the audience if there is any. But our audience is largely CFOs. In all of your positions, you work closely with the finance organization and CFOs, I presume. I would appreciate from each of the panelists to share with this group your view on what is your like a takeaway or top takeaway you would have from where you sit to a CFO audience for our roles, how we can be thinking about the HR compensation benefits topic this year. It just, kind of a takeaway piece of advice for us in the CFO seat would be great. And maybe I'll start with Tom from CFOs work a lot with the attorneys as well. Maybe I haven't pulled you in for a while. Maybe start with you.
Well, I guess a couple of takeaways just from sort of the legal standpoint. One is when you're going to, when you're looking at making changes, number one, just don't miss the obvious. Make sure you're not, if you've got written employment agreements that or incentive compensation plans, make sure you're not trying to modify them if you can't. If there's locked in, make sure you're not trying to take something away, by focusing on cash flow. And if you are, and you're going to try to get agreement from the affected executives as to what you're doing, make sure you're not giving, you've got to be careful when you start getting agreement and consent to some, reductions. So you're not going to hit them with imputed tax by doing something like, well, I'll tell you what, we'll take this away here, but then we'll make it up, next year, and we'll formally make it up, which could, which would really be sort of constructive receipt for taxes for them. So I guess that would probably be the biggest takeaway I would have. The only other one I would mention is it's kind of low hanging fruit, but if we talked about having, different work, different work arrangements and flexibility and desire for that. Well, if you've got some people that you're treating as exempt employees, exempt from overtime, and you're talking to them about, well, maybe you'd like a little more time at, a little more time at home, a little more flexibility. Make sure you're not going to drop their weekly rate underneath the amount needed to be able to classify them as an exempt employee.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And if in doubt, or even if not, consult your legal advisor, right?
Yeah. And I guess if I'd add one more thing, is when you're looking at incentive compensation as a broader thing, make sure if you're treating, job classifications or categories or levels, if you're treating people within that in a disparate way, make sure you're really documenting, is it because of performance? Is it because of seniority? So that you're not opening yourself up for, equal pay for equal wage claims.
Great advice. Thank you. Ali, how about you in terms of, kind of a takeaway advice for the CFO audience on this topic this year?
Yeah, I think, probably it's easy to look at things, from a pure kind of P&L dollars and cents perspective, but it is a unique year. And I think, we've all sort of felt the impact one way or the other, right? And so I think, as we sort of, and this is what I have to remind myself too, right? Which is as we kind of go into, trying to understand like what we should do for performance, and merit increases and things like that, we should just, make sure that we're not looking at it just from a dollar sense, but, from the shoes of the employees that have been impacted by this. And so that I guess is, something that I have to always remind myself of in times like this.
Thank you. How about you, Barbara, for our CFO audience? Any last comments or takeaways?
I think for the CFOs and the people that are making the financial decisions for an organization, I think transparency is huge, and letting folks know what's going on. It may even be a good time for an employee engagement survey to give people an opportunity to sort of speak out. Certainly you have to be a little careful when you do those so that people don't feel like, well, hey, I told you everything that was wrong and you haven't fixed it yet. But it could be something, especially if you don't have people in the offices with each other every day right now. It could be a way for them to get together, and a way that you could even solicit support for certain things if your survey asks for ideas for improvement. Maybe you can get some folks to work on committees to make some of those improvements. So maybe an employee engagement survey is well timed in this day.
That's a good thought. Thank you. Lynette, how about from you?
Well, first I'll just chime in on what Barbara said. We actually just finished our engagement survey September 25th, and really great results and responses. And we weren't sure it was supposed to be in April. We held off till now, and we launched it, and the feedback has been tremendous. We went up in 27 out of 28 categories, and a lot of it is because we've been so focused on our people during this time. And that will get you very far just as an organization and pulling together. So I'm a strong promoter of doing the engagement survey. You may not hear, you know, what you want to hear, or even if scores go down, I think it's so important to understand where your employees' minds are at. So I would encourage that. And then just for the finance community on the phone and the CFOs, I'll do a plug for HR and say, make sure if your HR leader is not one of your best friends, make that happen. Because as I look back over the companies I've been at, I've been so fortunate to work with really great finance partners, and we've been linked at the hip. And I think it's made such an impact because we're making better decisions together versus the finance team coming and saying, you know, well, do this, or I took this accrual down to that, and say, oh my gosh, really? Because guess what? The comp committee is going to use discretion, and how are we not connected on that? Now we have to rebuild their accrual. Or so just make sure you're connected. And I always appreciate the fresh perspective that finance brings in. I think they appreciate the HR perspective, and we always end up in a better place. So I would strongly encourage you, if you're not linked at the hip or best friends with your HR partner, work on that, because you'll come out better in the end.
From my experience, I couldn't agree with you more. Really, really key. Helps the whole team, you know, leadership team, board too.
Yep, exactly.
Don, to round out our group, anything you have to add for our CFO audience in terms of advice or takeaways?
Yeah, I'll just dovetail a little bit on what Lynette said. And, you know, obviously when we deal with benefits and renewals and these type of discussion, we typically have the finance and the HR at the table at the same time. And in previous years, it's been maybe that adversarial kind of competing against the finance and what's good for the employees, what's good for the company. And I think this is the first year that I think with the situation we're all in, that people are saying, let's come together, let's figure out that let's not make short-term financial cuts that are going to impact us in soft dollar cost long-term with employees. With turnover eventually, when the economy gets better and we get back to that thing, we're going to have soft costs of training, mentoring, bringing new people in. So I think I would just say for the finance folks, have that collaborative approach, like Lynette said, and I think you're going to find the right solution that say, let's not forget about the soft costs that potentially could be long-term if we make the wrong decisions. So I would just echo what everybody said on this team. It's about transparency and communicating with your employees to make sure that the decisions you make are for the right reasons. So I think that would just be what I would just echo what everybody else said.
Great, thank you. Really good dialogue and perspectives. I guess in times of particular, you know, increased strife or unusual times, just like oftentimes there's tendency for families and communities to pull together. I feel like companies are doing that a lot. I seem to be hearing that across the board, and it feels that way from this panel. So, you know, that seems really positive for employees, that companies are understanding even more the importance of the people right behind the scenes and behind the success of the company, and the struggles that they're having as individuals and employees right now. So really appreciate today's perspectives. Mary or Charisse, are there any additional questions, or certainly we can open up the mics, right, for people to jump in with comments or questions for the panel.
Yes, thank you, Lynn, and thank you to all of our panelists. I would like to take this moment to invite people to turn on your videos. Don't be shy. Turn on the videos. This is the time to unmute yourself and really use this opportunity. We've got a good 10 minutes here that we can throw out some questions and, you know, ask these experts what they're seeing, and what, you know, if you're going through something right now, this is the time to use to reach out and get some feedback on that. So I'd invite everybody to on video. Oh, here I'm not even videoed myself. So there we go. There I am. So I don't have any questions that have snuck in. In working with the polls, I may have missed this or not, but Don, you and I in our kind of planning talk, we had specifically talked about you know, CFOs who are dealing with the renewals and their, you know, the cost of that they're going to have to build into their budgets, but their budgets haven't grown and they're still dealing with that. And did you want to touch on that a little bit? Your advice for the CFOs?
Yeah, I think it's it's another line item for companies to have to deal with, right? They have to understand what's the impact of these cost increases that they're seeing on the healthcare side. And those groups that are self-insured, that are funding their own claims, for those that are aware of that, you know, maybe claims are down this year because of non-emergent services happening. So how do you build that back in if things are to go back to quote unquote more normal in the future? So I think it's a challenge for that. It's probably accruing the right amount of money and trying to balance that out with trying to not push too much onto the employees as far as the contribution. So I think what I had mentioned earlier is anecdotally, I don't see employers pushing any more onto their employees than they can handle, especially given other things that they've had to sacrifice throughout the year with, you know, 401k match or no merits or salary reductions or whatever. So I feel like the companies are trying to figure out a way to kind of do that, either through plan design, structure, that type of stuff. So there's different strategies that they're looking at to try to balance that out so they don't put any more pressure on the employees.
Thanks for that. Are there any other questions?
We covered so much. They must all be answered.
Right? We checked all the boxes. Everyone's going to go back to the office and just have perfect plans. So kudos. This is wonderful. Well, I can certainly jump into some of my closing remarks, and we can use the time that's left to just network with ourselves. That's okay. A big, huge thank you to all of our panelists. It was wonderful, and I really appreciate the conversation we could have today. A couple things to note. We do have some great things coming up for upcoming events. You may have noticed most of our chapters have taken the month of November off because we have CFO Week coming up, which includes our masterclass series and the MIT Accelerator Program. And we're going to have a lot of really amazing speakers are lined up. I would encourage everybody to check it out. For those who are premium members, it's included in your membership fee. So there's no additional cost for that to attend the CFO Masterclass series. The MIT Accelerator Program is a separate program. We have partnered with MIT Sloan, and there is a cost to that program, but there are very limited seats. So I know that there are a few spots left open, so if you're interested in it, check out the website. There's a lot of information on that. And a reminder that CPE certificates are going to be uploaded into the YM portal. They should be there in about 2 weeks. Of course, our next upcoming program at a chapter for Minneapolis will be December 17th, and it's featuring a real estate market update. And so we're excited about that. It will be another afternoon program similar to this day. And then lastly, another reminder of the survey. It should take about 2 minutes, but we do use that survey to build out future programs. And, you know, if you've got something keeping you up at night, we want to know about it. And we will build a program around it and try to help solve those problems, because that's why we're here. So it looks like, oh, and Charisse has even entered the link in our chat to make it really easy for everybody to join. So thank you, Charisse, for doing that. But that does conclude our program for today. I will happy to bring back our groovy music, but we can hang in the room for a little bit longer. We have about 5 more minutes left, and it's ours to use as we deem.
Well, thank you, Mary, for facilitating us. And thanks again to all the panelists for joining. I really appreciate your insights and the variety of perspectives and supporting our organization. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the discussion. It was good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the breakouts. Helpful.
Thank you, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we're losing a few. That's okay. We can call it.
Mary, did you?
I'll let you guys get back, give you a few minutes back to your night.
Okay.
And hopefully your families to your homes.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Have a great night, you
Take care.
guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Sharice, we got all the polls out. Yeah, we did. Okay.
Sorry, I was
stopped seeing
muted.
them for.
Really?
No,
No,
that's
we got
okay.
them all out. I sent all of them and they were active. So I know I'm worried why you didn't see them, but people that, participated.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. Well, I will close out the
Okay.
I'll close out the program and so that Katie can edit it out.
All right. Talk to you later.
Like saying, hi, Katie. All right.